Hi, Tracy here, and thank you for joining me. Today I'm going to share with you some of the wonderful painting techniques that I've used in our latest book, The Hummingbird's Embrace. Now these techniques are very simple and anyone can use them. So come and join me, play with paint and enjoy the process. So some of the projects that I have painted in the Hummingbird's Embrace are a set of placemats, and I'm going to demonstrate the technique that I used for painting these placemats to you shortly, but I'll just show you the placemats. So you can see it's a combination of embroidery, which incorporates a fully embroidered bird and some beautiful outline designs. Now, if you don't wish to paint, you can keep them as quilted designs, or you could use some of the fully embroidered designs to complete them. But what I've done is use the 4 different birds from the collection in each of the placemats. Now I've also painted on this beautiful accessory bag, and you can see here that the bird itself is embroidered and the painting is around the outside. Now the technique that I have used on this dark cork is slightly different to the technique that I have used on the fabric itself, only because this is light and these are dark colours. Now the paints that I use for this are Jo Sonia's Artist Acrylic, and the reason I use the Artist Acrylic is because of its light fastness. It's not a craft paint, it is an art paint, and it won't fade over time like most craft paints do. Now, because it is an artist paint, we do have to add a drop of textile medium. So with each of the colours that I'm using, I'm just going to put one little drop of textile medium into each of the colours and mix well. Now I'm using a palette knife here, but if you don't have a palette knife, you can actually use the wrong end of your paintbrush. Now I never recommend using the bristles, because it actually can damage the bristles and you won't get that lovely crisp edge that you need. So if you need to mix, use the wrong end of your brush, and then make sure that you clean it properly, because if you don't, you often find you're wearing it. The effect that I really love is a beautiful, delicate watercolour effect. Now, we can't use water on fabric because it just bleeds and the paint will just run everywhere. It's impossible to control water on fabric. So what I've developed is an amazing technique using a gel retarder. Now, this gel we paint onto the fabric first, and then we allow it to sit. And because it's a gel, it's not going to bleed. Now, it's called retarder because it retards or slows the drying time of the paint down, and it allows us to get this beautiful softness that you can see here in this piece. So the brushes I like to use are stiff synthetic bristle brushes, and these ones are called angle shaders, and you can see how the top is angled rather than blunt. Now, I like these because then you can get nicely into fine points and things like that. So when we're using acrylic paint, we need to dampen the brush first, but take all the excess water out. As I said, we can't use water on the fabric because the paint will bleed. The reason we wet the bristles is so that the paint doesn't dry onto the bristles and make them splay. So I'm going to start with the leaves, and I'm pulling some gel from the puddle out, and I'm dressing or loading the brush with the gel, but I'm working it well into the bristles. Now what I'm going to do is paint the gel onto the leaf, staying inside the lines. And I'm using a little bit of pressure to force this into the fabric so that it's not just sitting on top. I want this to actually soak in, and it's that will give that beautiful soft watercolory effect. And you can see how the metallic thread acts as a barrier, and it also helps to prevent. It doesn't fully prevent, but it will help to prevent the paint from bleeding out. Now we don't want to use too much. You can see I'm coming in, I'm not going into the main puddle. I'm just working with a little bit from the side and working it well into the brush and making sure I'm covering the leaf and getting right down into the peaks. And that's where the angle is fantastic, to get right down into those little peaks. We use very little paint for this technique, and that also helps to give it the lovely softness. So once I've got the gel on the leaf, I'm going to go back and put a little bit more into my brush. Make sure I've blended it in really well. And with the pointy tip, I'm going to touch it into the paint. And you can see I've got a tiny wee bit of paint there. And I'm working it backwards and forwards on the palette so that the colour itself will blend across the bristles of the brush. And now I'm going to start with the long tip closest to that central vein and blend the colour out. And you can see how having that gel on there keeps it lovely and soft. And this will just keep bleeding into the gel, but it won't go past the gel. So it will end up softening off beautifully. Now, I use different size brushes. This is a big leaf, so I'm using a fairly large brush. If you feel a little bit apprehensive about using a brush this size, you could go down a size and use one of the smaller brushes. Now, this is a number 5 and this is a number 7. Interestingly enough, this one's a number 4. So this one is from Michael's, this one's from Hobby Lobby. In Australia, we have different brands, but you can get your angle shaders at any of the good art supplies, and they are fabulous for this type of technique. And you can see how simple this is. Having the gel on the surface makes all the difference. If you tried to do this without the gel, it'd be almost impossible. So I've completed the green on the leaf. Now, I have only used one colour, and that is pine green. And by adding varying amounts, you can make it lighter or darker to give a bit of variation. Now, one of the things I like to do is add an accent colour onto the leaves. And if you have a look here, you can see how, because this is close to the head of the bird, I've used a little bit of red paint to give a little bit of an accent here. And for those leaves that are closer to the flower, I have actually used the colours from the flower in the tips of the leaves. So to do that, again, we come in with some gel in the brush, and this time I'm going to come into my red paint and take a tiny amount of red. Now, always remember to work it well into your brush on the palette before you go to the fabric. And you can just add that tiny little blush of colour. Now, I've picked up a little bit of extra gel there because it was a little bit dry. And you can see how the paint grabbed where it was dry. So by adding a little bit of gel into the brush, I can actually blend that out, so it's not such a hard line. So we've completed the leaf for the moment, and it will dry now. Now, it will take at least 24 hours for that to dry. So what we're going to do is move on to the flowers. Now, the technique initially with the flowers is exactly the same. So we work some gel into the brush, and the first ones I'm going to do are these under petals. So the two underneath here and this main one in the bud itself. So get your gel. Now I've worked it well into the brush. We don't have too much on there. We want to make sure that we've got gel on, but not enough that it's going to run. So work it right up nice into the corner. So I'm working it into the fabric, and we're going to let it sit for a little bit. Now I've mixed the burgundy and amethyst together, and all the colours are listed in the book, so you can follow through with the step-by-step written and pictorial instructions from the book. So I'm working this colour really well into my brush, still with some gel in the brush. And with the long edge, which has the most paint on it, I'm putting that colour into those bottom parts. And because there's gel here, that colour will slowly soften and bleed down. Now, if you find you get too much colour on, you can use your paper towel and blot and see how it's lifted some of that colour out. You can add extra colour if you wish. Because the gel stays wet for quite some time, it gives you the time to be able to play and work with it. And I always work from that point down into the petal. Rather than working backwards, I work from the top down. Now you can see how that's a little bit dry. So I'm going to come in now and pick up just that tiny little bit more gel. And the reason I can tell it's dry is because the colour's not bleeding, it's not moving, and it's sort of left a hard edge. So you can come back with the gel, not too much, just enough, and blend that colour through so you get that beautiful soft effect. So for the next part of the flower, we're going to use the same process, so getting some gel into the brush and painting the gel onto that bulbous part at the top. Now we're not going to paint the very top little part, that's actually green. So we'll do that when we finish the leaves. But we're going to paint the large bulbous part and then these petals that come down from there. Now I've mixed amethyst and titanium white to give a lovely soft mauvey lilac colour. And I'm going to again blend that colour, so I've got a hair on my brush, well into the brush. And I'm going to start by painting around the edge of the top bulb area and leaving a bit of the fabric in the middle to create the highlight. Now the next I'm going to do is bring some of that colour down into these particular petals. My paint's drying very quickly here because we're sitting in air conditioning on a very hot day here in sunny Queensland. So as you can see, I'm pulling some of this colour just down into the tip or the first part of those petals. And then I'm going to come down here to the base and pull a little colour up from the base. And you can see I'm leaving a part of the fabric through the middle to create the highlight on the petal. Now I'm pulling some colour from the base up and from the top down, leaving that little bit of fabric. Top down. Now you can make these as light or as dark as you like. You could add more amethyst if you wanted more colour, or you could have them lighter. That is entirely up to you. So same technique, different colour. Top down, bottom up. So now we have a highlight that goes through this main bulbous area of those petals, and we have a highlight right in the middle. So now I'm going to use straight titanium white, which has a little bit of textile medium in it, and I'm using a number 2 round brush, and I'm working this white paint into the brush, and I'm going to add a little extra highlight just in that area where it was just fabric and no paint. And the same through this section here. So this technique I'm using is more of what we call a dry brush technique. So I'm not using gel in the brush, I'm just brushing the white colour over to give more light to that area. And you can see I'm just sweeping that colour over and building it up slowly. I'm not putting heavy paint on too fast, I'm working with it a little at a time. So you can see now they've all been painted, all the leaves and all the flowers. And once it's dry, you can see how much softer it looks. Those colours just soften, they blend into the fabric and become part of the fabric to give that beautiful, delicate watercolour effect. And you can see the same technique is used on all the leaves, just adding the different accent colours, and the flowers are all the same as well. So what I'd like to share with you now is how to paint the same type of flowers and leaves on a dark fabric or cork. Now the cork surface is a little bit different to fabric. It's not as porous, so the paint doesn't bleed in and as much. So although we use the gel to get that soft technique, you'll find that it will sit on the surface and take a little bit longer to dry. So the first thing we're going to do is put a little bit of gel onto the leaves. Now you can put gel onto more than one leaf at a time. I'm just doing this one at a time because I'm showing you the technique. But because the gel takes quite a long time to dry, you could go on and actually gel all of the leaves and then paint them all. Now you can see I've covered this leaf. So when I use the exact same colour, that pine green, on the dark colour, it doesn't stand out as much. So what I do is add a little bit of the titanium white into the pine green. Just a little, we don't want, oh, my green's dry, I'm going to have to get some more. See here on the palette now, I've mixed some of the titanium white in with the pine green to make this mid-value green. So the technique I'm going to use is exactly the same. Now it is imperative with the cork, because the paint's sitting on the surface, that you use that textile medium, because that is actually like a glue and that will stick the paint to the surface and to your fabric. So this time I'm going into the lighter green, blending it well on the palette, and I'm going to use the exact same technique to put colour into the leaf. You'll notice that it doesn't bleed out or soften out as much on the cork because it's sitting on the surface. But because of the gel, you've still got that playtime, so you can add extra, build it up slowly and get the colour that you want. I find I use a little bit more paint on the cork as well because it is a dark colour. We need a little bit of extra colour to make it stand out. But it's a beautiful surface to work on. Cork, leather, vinyl, you can paint using this technique on any of those surfaces. And you can see we've got our green on the leaf. So now I'd like to add a little bit of the accent colour onto the leaf. So because it's close to the flowers, I'm only using the colours from the flowers. I'm not actually going to use the red on this particular design. I'm just going to pick up a little bit of that amethyst and white, and I'm going to pull it into the tip and give a nice little highlight of colour on the tip of the leaf. Now you can use the darker colours as well if you wish. Get a little bit of that darker colour on there. And it looks completely different because it's against a dark surface instead of a light. So this laptop bag is actually one of the projects from the book as well. And I've made this also using that lovely navy cork. Now this is a beautiful, very thick, lovely quality cork from Portugal. And the flowers and leaves are similar. Now with the flowers, because they're light, this time instead of focusing on the shading or the points and these parts here, we've actually put the light colour into highlight through the centre to give it its colour. So I'll share with you that technique. The leaves are just as I've shown you, and now I'm going to share with you how I created the flowers in reverse. So now I'm going to paint the flower, and while it starts off the same as how we painted the flowers before, the ending is a little bit different. We do the darker colour first, that colour deep in those under petals. And again, using the point of the brush, get that colour to come off down onto the gel. And as I said before, you will find you need a little bit extra working on a dark background like this. And just a little bit in under there. So now I'm going to put the gel onto those remaining petals of each of the flowers. And I'm making sure that I'm staying within the lines from each one. I don't want the paint, where we put the gel, the paint can bleed out to wherever the gel is, so we need to try and keep it as best we can inside the lines. And by the lines I mean the outline stitches from the metallic. So I've got my gel on those petals. Now what I'm going to do is come in with my light colour, my amethyst and white, just as we did before. Oops, I picked up a little too much this time. And instead of painting it in the top and the bottom, we're actually going to paint it across the middle. Now you can see I've got the point of the brush facing up, and then I'm going to turn it around and actually pull a little bit of that colour upward. So we're getting a highlight through the centre of the petal. So pointy tip up, pointy tip down. And we get a lovely soft blended effect with our petals. So instead of painting in the shadows, this time we're actually painting in the highlights. So all the greens are done. We've put our highlight accents in instead of our shading. The last thing we need to do is add the little bits of green to the top section of each of those flowers. And to do that, we're going to use that little round brush that I was using before. Again, a little bit of gel. Paint it on the surface. And with the pine green and white mix, paint it around the outside edge. Now, with all of this, less is more, and I always say you can always add more colour. It's easier to add than it is to take away. So build it up slowly. You can see I've added a little bit more of the pink colour to the base part of the flower and in the tip of the leaf. And now I'm going to add just a little bit more of the green paint to get that nice and coloured. I can even go in now and add a little bit more of that green onto the leaf. Less is more, and I find I much prefer to build it up slowly than to come in with too much colour too fast. So you can see how that's really picking up more colour now and giving a lot more to the leaf. You can see this side I've added extra green. This side I have not. So it's up to you as to how much or how little colour that you like. But this is the technique that I've used on my laptop bag and for our little accessory bag. Now this bag, you might be wondering what it is for. And I actually store my machine feet and my bobbins and things in these lovely little boxes. And you can fit 3 of the boxes in this little bag. Now, the other great purpose for this little bag is if you're a traveller, like I am, these make the best little toiletry bags. Thank you for joining me for the painting demonstration on the projects for our beautiful new book, Hummingbird's Embrace.